100 stacks of $100 bills. Exactly 1 million. The money is scattered across the cold concrete floor of a helipad, 50 stories high, being whipped by the wind from the spinning rotors. The dried blood on the side of the Italian leather briefcase contrasts with Richard's once impeccable suit, now torn at the shoulder and stained with soot. He is on his knees, panting, his bloody fingers desperately gripping the helicopter door. Down below, the city burns. Thick black smoke swallows New York, hiding the screams and the sound of thousands of footsteps running in blind panic. Richard coughs violently and screams against the roar of the engine. 2 million! I'll give you 2 million. Let me in. Inside the cockpit, protected by bulletproof glass and illuminated by the green glow of the LED panels, the pilot doesn't move a muscle to take the money. He calmly adjusts his headset, turns his face slowly, and looks the billionaire deep in the eyes. With a slow movement, he locks the door from the inside. But how was the most powerful man in the city reduced to begging on his knees to a mere employee? And why did the pilot refuse what would change his life forever? UST 48 hours earlier, the world still revolved around money. Stocks went up and down, power was measured by bank balances, and Richard was the undisputed king of this chessboard. He was the owner of a real estate empire that stretched across the entire country, a man who vehemently believed that everything and everyone had a price. On that very penthouse where he now begs for his own life, the billionaire had perpetrated what he considered just another act of corporate management. He had publicly humiliated Gabriel, a young outsourced pilot. Gabriel's crime? During a medical emergency, he diverted the company helicopter and used 5 extra minutes of fuel to take his own mother, who was suffering a heart attack, to the nearest hospital. In the boardroom, in front of all the directors, Richard showed no gratitude for the young man's honesty, nor empathy for his pain. He simply pulled a $10 bill from his wallet, threw it at Gabriel's chest, and said, with a sneer, "Buy a coffee and wake up to the real world. You and your family aren't worth more than the fuel you stole from my company. Pack your things and get lost." The real world that Richard had lectured about evaporated the next morning. It started with whispers on the local news, inexplicable outbreaks of violence in downtown emergency rooms, patients biting nurses, people with extremely high fevers who suddenly exhibited a bestial and uncontrollable rage. There was no scientific explanation, there was no effective official announcement, just chaos rising on an exponential curve. In a few hours, communication networks began to fail. What the media tried to classify as a rage outbreak soon revealed itself to be something much worse. The apocalypse didn't ask for permission, didn't sign any advance notice contract. The infection spread through the blood in seconds. Neighbors devoured neighbors. Traffic stopped. The law of the jungle swallowed urban civilization before noon. From his armored glass tower, Richard watched the city plunge into madness, holding his glass of whiskey, still certain that his bank accounts would protect him from what was happening to the mortals down below. At 5 in the afternoon, the stock market was irrelevant, and money had lost its value. The screams reached the lobby of Richard's building. The emergency phone lines were dead. For the first time in his life, the billionaire felt the cold sweat of fear. He tried to call the mayor, the generals he had bribed in the past, his private security team. No one answered. The building, once a symbol of his power, became a vertical trap. The public power grid failed, plunging the skyscraper into the gloom of emergency lights. In the luxurious hallways of the 45th floor, bloodied secretaries ran. Men in suits and ties attacked each other like wild animals. Richard's illusion of control collapsed along with the sun. It was time to activate Plan B. Richard went to the concealed safe in his office. The plan was simple and foolproof. A private high-tech bunker in the Adirondack Mountains, stocked with 10 years' worth of food and armed security. To get there, he only needed to go up 5 more floors to the helipad, board his private aircraft, and escape. He filled a leather briefcase with $1 million in cash and some solid gold bars. In the new world, he thought, gold would still hold value. There was only one critical problem. His personal pilot was not responding on the radio. Through the security cameras, Richard saw his pilot being torn apart on the ground floor. In absolute panic, the billionaire used the building's internal intercom system, which was still running on the generator, and made a desperate announcement. He offered $1 million in cash, gold, and a spot in his bunker to any employee with a pilot's license who could make it to the roof. It was an auction for his own life. Richard's climb to the helipad was a nightmare that no money could buy. The elevators were jammed. He had to face the emergency stairs. With each floor he climbed, his breathing grew heavier, and the sounds of death echoed through the concrete. He saw his own security guards, burly and highly trained men, abandon their posts or become snarling monsters. On the 48th floor, he came face to face with his former vice president, now with milky eyes and a dislocated jaw. The monster lunged. Richard, driven by the pure adrenaline of self-preservation, used the weight of the briefcase full of gold to strike the infected man's skull repeatedly. Blood splattered on his his face. The man who had never dirted his hands in his life was now covered in the brutality of the new world. In parallel, another journey was taking place. Gabriel, the fired pilot, was in the building's basement cleaning out his locker when the hell started. Ironically, being in the isolated basement gave him time to understand the situation before being attacked. When he heard Richard's announcement over the intercom, a survival instinct and a bold plan formed in his mind. His mother was safe in a military hospital outside the city, but he needed to get out of Manhattan to reach her. The helicopter on the roof was the only way out. Gabriel didn't take the main stairs. He used the ventilation ducts and the maintenance stairs, workers' paths that the billionaire didn't even know existed. Agile, silent, and invisible, he reached the top 15 minutes before Richard. When Richard finally opened the heavy fire door to the terrace, the sound of the spinning rotors was like heavenly music. Night had already fallen, illuminated only by the flames of the neighboring buildings. He ran across the asphalt, his lungs burning, tripping over his own feet. The helicopter was there, running, with the navigation lights blinking. A pilot was already in the cockpit. Richard felt a wave of triumph. His plan worked. His money worked. Believing he had bought his salvation once again, he approached the passenger door, panting, showing off the briefcase, and shouting orders to take off immediately. It was then that the pilot turned his face toward him. The dim light from the dashboard illuminated his features. The smile of relief on Richard's face froze and died. The billionaire's heart, already beating erratically, seemed to stop for a second. It was Gabriel, the $10 coffee boy. Gabriel was no longer wearing the company uniform. He had cuts on his face and the hard eyes of someone who had seen the end of the world. He showed no anger, he didn't shout. He merely looked at the man outside as if he were looking at just any stranger on the street. Richard, paralyzed by shock and wounded pride, resorted to the only language he knew. With trembling hands, he opened the briefcase. The wind generated by the rotors caught the $100 bills and began to scatter them across the dark roof like useless confetti. "Look at this, boy," Richard screamed. "$1 million. There's gold here too. Take me with you. You and your mother will have the best medical care money can buy." Gabriel remained expressionless. He looked at the bills sticking to the pools of blood on the helipad, then looked at the pleading eyes of the richest man in the city. For the first time in his life, Richard realized that the man's currency was not the dollar. The sound of the wind was cut by a metallic crash coming from the terrace door. The banging became frantic, accompanied by inhuman grunts. The metal of the emergency door began to bend outward. The hinges cracked. A horde had followed the smell of Richard's blood up the stairs. Dozens of infected crushed themselves against the door, forcing their way onto the roof. Richard looked back, terrified, and returned to pounding on the helicopter glass. "Please, in the name of God, I'll give you everything I have. The company is yours." Time was running out. Gabriel lowered the cockpit window just a crack, enough for his voice to be heard over the chaos. "The real world has changed, Richard," he said with a frightening calmness. "And today, your entire empire isn't even worth my fuel." The exact second Gabriel pulled the controls, the terrace door exploded. A wave of pale, furious bodies flooded the helipad. The helicopter rose smoothly into the night air. Richard screamed, trying to grab onto the aircraft's skid, but his fingers slipped on his own blood. From above, as he gained altitude toward a burning horizon, Gabriel watched the tide of monsters swallow the man who once owned the world. Richard was buried under a rain of $100 bills, which now flew uselessly through the air, unable to buy a single second of life. The apocalypse had arrived for everyone, but at the top of the world, justice, after all, was priceless.